What could go right? I'm Zachary Karabell, the founder of the Progress Network, joined by my co-host, Emma Varvaloucas, the executive director of the Progress Network. And this is our weekly progress report, our adjunct to our longer form What Could Go Right interview podcast. Even in a world full of dark despair, there's lots of points of light that we ought to be paying attention to, because that is just as much part of the human existence as the negative. Except that we don't pay as much attention to it, except for Emma, who pays inordinate attention to it. So, what do you have for us this week, Emma?
Yeah, I thought it would be a good time to talk a little bit about Brazil and South Korea. Can we guess what those two
always a good
countries have in
time.
common?
Always a good time to talk about Brazil and South Korea. Hard to know what they have in common. One's a peninsula, one's not a peninsula. Tell us.
Going in the wrong
Going
direction. That's
in the wrong
okay. I think
direction. Okay.
most people would not have caught this common thread. But both of them have had particularly good few weeks for democracy. I guess depending on your vantage point.
That's
But
right, democracy. I've heard about
yeah,
that.
that old canard. Both have gone through very interesting political tumult recently. Let's start with Brazil. Late last month, so in late March, Brazil's Supreme Court ruled that the former president Jair Bolsonaro must stand trial for charges related to an alleged coup to overthrow the results of their 2022 presidential election. This coup plan was pretty substantive. A 884-page report by the federal police alleges that it entailed not only killing the winner of the presidential election, which is the current president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, which is the third time he's been president of Brazil, by the way, the vice president, and a Supreme Court justice. So this was pretty deep.
Yeah.
Insofar as coup plots go.
Yep. And then there was, of course, the storming of Brasilia and the state capital. And I guess the very similar to themes, echoes of January 6, 2020 in the United States. Brasilia in particular had its own version thereof.
Right. And that activity had already gotten Bolsonaro barred from running for public office until 2030, although he, to this day, says that he's not going to listen to that. But the Supreme Court weighed in on, is he going to have to stand trial for this coup attempt? They said, yes, he's going to have to do it. And so the criminal proceedings for that started last week. So this is mid-April. He's not the only one that's facing charges. There are also a handful of high-ranking military officials, and it's actually the first time in Brazil's history that high-ranking military officials are going to have to stand trial for a coup or an attempted coup. So Brazil was in dire straits a couple years ago, and now political scientists are noting that it's essentially back to business as usual there. So it just goes to show that some countries can come pretty close to the brink and recover quite quickly.
Yeah. And then we have South Korea, which had the weirdest 6-hour declaration of martial law by the then president, who I think you will tell us about what has happened to the then president. But the one thing about South Korea that struck me over the past 6 months is it's one of the few countries in the world that felt like making the United States look less dramatically weird by comparison.
I would agree until it kind of came to this final conclusion, or one of the final conclusions on the matter. So yes, the now former president, Yoon Suk Yeol, he declared martial law in late December, citing these sort of like vague anti-state forces, North Korean communist forces. Like there was no reason to declare emergency martial law, but he did. And when Parliament gathered immediately to repeal that declaration, he actually sent troops to their state house to prevent that happening. But the vote went through anyway. Martial law was only in place for like 6 hours. And since then, there has been an attempt by Parliament to have him impeached. And earlier this month, South Korea's Constitutional Court did decide unanimously, and it's an 8-judge panel, to uphold that impeachment. So he is out of there. And the South Koreans will be voting for a new president by early June.
And he is also on trial separately for, I think, corruption and a whole series of charges.
Yes. He's facing criminal charges for that whole martial law for no reason thing.
Well, there's several prime ministers and presidents of the past 20 or 30 years in South Korea have also been charged and sentenced. So they do have there's a South Korean tradition of trying and sentencing former leaders. So we talk a lot in the United States about weaponization, lawfare, all the things that particularly the Trumplandia folks have accused the Biden folks of doing, legit or not legit. Clearly is the case in many other countries as well, where there is a kind of arena-ish quality to being in high politics, the stakes of which can in fact be incarceration and trials and endless trials. Some of that, it's interesting. I guess we'll see from Brazil in the next years whether this series, because Lulu, the current president, was also imprisoned for corruption,
Yeah.
right? His successor was impeached, Dilma. Whether or not this leads to more political confidence in the system, more public confidence in the political system, or more cynicism about the corruption of the political system. And I think literally the jury is out on whether this endless series makes people feel like their leaders are accountable, or whether it makes them feel like their leaders are subject to the whims of other leaders, depending on who has power at any given time. I'm only raising this question because that's clearly an active issue in the United States, whether or not we have politicized our justice system, or whether or not the justice system remains above politics in a way that engenders
Mhm.
public confidence.
Yeah. It's actually one reason why I talk about South Korea and Brazil in the newsletter this week. And it's one reason why I didn't bring up Marine Le Pen's case, because it is a corruption case. It's like a misuse of money case. And while people are certainly entitled to their opinions about whether or not she should, face consequences for that, she's been barred for running for office for a certain number of years. To me, the anti-democracy power grab attempts are in another realm entirely. That being said, like, absolutely, it's true what you're pointing out, that if you are in South Korea or if you're in Brazil, these things are very polarized matters in society, and how you view them is going to be a little bit different from how we're viewing them on the outside, which is basically like, this was a naked power grab and it didn't turn out. So I'm going to call that a democratic win.
Right.
Not so clear when you're on the ground to
I mean, the
people.
South Korea one, I mean, I guess he had about 25% popularity, even after the martial law declaration. There definitely were people who were like, you go, the forces arrayed against you are evil and bad, even if they're democratic, and do whatever it takes. But that was a clear cut case, or at least it seems more clear cut. They then, by the way, impeached his successor for not appointing judge. I mean, it devolved into a little more of a messy aftermath. The South Korea case is cleaner. Like, they're just places you don't go. It is disturbing that about 25% of the people in South Korea still supported that declaration of martial law. So, I mean, yeah, there's a consensus. It's where you shouldn't go, but it's not like the Supreme Court ruled, the Constitutional Court ruled unanimously he should be removed. But it's not like the public was quite as unanimous. Maybe that's not a fair litmus. Maybe in every society, like 20% of the people are going to support something that 80% think is nuts or questionable.
I don't know what the percent breakdown is in Brazil about like pro Bolsonaro, anti Bolsonaro. I don't know. If you are aware, I would be interested in that in terms of how the public is viewing this.
I mean, the Bolsonaro was still 37% in December. There is a significant chunk of Brazilian public opinion that still supports Bolsonaro or supports his view of what Brazil should do.
Moving beyond that discussion, I thought it would be nice to bring it up because we haven't talked about either of those cases on the podcast, and they certainly present a different kind of timeline than what we might be seeing in front of us right now. Let's do one of my favorite things to reference on the podcast and in the Progress Network in general, which is really long, finicky World Bank reports.
Love those, man. I once went into a World Bank bookstore, which was just festooned with these multi-volume, thick reports of positive developments in Equatorial Guinea and
Yeah.
development reports for Bangladesh. I mean, things that I'm sure are very important on the ground, but clearly stuff that no one ever read or ever will read.
Yeah, I most of the time when I'm reading these reports, I'm like, who else is even reading these? Why am I reading these?
You should probably email the authors and be like, "Oh my God, someone read them. Thank God, I've got a fan. I've got one person."
I know. I hope they know that they do have a fan out there. It's me, their number one fan. But there is some interesting stuff. I know I'm just going to say this as an aside. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but for instance, I did find out from the World Bank recently that Nepal's extreme poverty rate has dropped to like 0.37%, which is crazy.
Wow.
I used to live there, so the fact that that has happened is wild. It's not unalloyed good news because the main reason why that has occurred is not because the economy has stabilized. It's mostly because of mass migration out of Nepal and remittances sent back home from like Gulf countries. So it's not
Huh.
exactly, what can you really say about that? It's good, but it's not like a stable situation for the country. So
Although
anyway,
there have been a lot of countries from the 1960s, 70s onward where remittances were a vital part of whatever economic breakthrough those societies
mm,
had. So
mm,
you're right that you can't like build an economy on remittances, but you can jumpstart or you can accelerate an economy toward breaking out of a cycle of poverty with remittances, assuming the government and the country uses that well and it doesn't all just go into cash that gets spent in an informal economy way. So it kind of then depends on what happens with the remittances on the other side. But look, remittances have helped the Filipinos become a more affluent society. They've helped certainly multiple Latin American countries. So I think it depends.
yeah, no, that's a good point. Actually, should look a little bit more into the history. I know, yeah, you mentioned the Philippines. The remittances did play a good role, but there was some other stuff going on there too. I think in Southeast Asia generally. But anyway, that was just mentioned as an aside. I will get to the main juicy World Bank news, which is that more people than at any other point in history are now covered by some form of social protection, which
Wow.
in this case means like targeted cash transfers, disability or unemployment benefits, pensions, think things like
Healthcare.
that. Yes.
Healthcare.
This is a totally unfair quiz question because I feel like how could you possibly get this right? But if you were to guess, how many people in the world are not covered by any form of social protection still? How many would you guess?
Ooh, wow, that is a good one, putting me on the spot. How many people in the world are not covered by social protection? What would my guess
In
be?
some
I
form.
In some form, I
Yes.
would say uh somewhere between 800 million and 1.2 billion.
That is not a bad guess. I'm really impressed. You are not that far off. It's 1.6 billion is their
Okay.
estimate. Yeah. There's no way I would have been able to guess anywhere near that. So, on the one hand, it's 1.6 billion people. It's certainly not a small number. On the other, it's more than we've ever had covered.
I didn't have a chance to either Google or ChatGPT that one. So just for the record, for those of you listening, you could check out the video. We didn't edit it. It was a bona fide guesstimate on my part.
It was a
Just
good
saying.
guess. I
Okay.
am I am duly impressed. But yes, I mean, and it has expanded, even over the last decade. It's from a group of 75 countries that they found that particularly in poorer countries and low and middle income countries, social protection has expanded, 10, 15, 17 percentage points of the country's population. So it's one of those things where like it's hard to write like a really sexy article about that, but it's actually like pretty significant historical change.
But it's not hard to write a really dense World Bank report that you then apparently treat as weekend reading. What's
Yeah.
you reading there, Emma? Oh, nothing.
Uh,
Just the World Bank report on social service poverty alleviation, 2000 to 2024.
they're so long and so overly detailed.
A lot of
So,
graphs.
yeah. No, there's
No,
so much
no
text.
graphs. No
I mean,
graphs.
there's some graphs, but there's not nearly enough pictures. Let's say that.
Okay. Well, if anyone from the World Bank is listening, we want you to know that we
More
got you.
pictures.
More
More
pictures. We
pictures,
want more
please.
graphs. We love
Yeah.
what you got. We love
Yeah.
what you put out.
And that's what I've got for this week. So I hope that suits those listening.
I think it should. It does. In my opinion, it has to.
They don't have any other choice, I guess. So
So thank you all for listening to our. It wasn't really a romp or even a traipse. It was more of a brief stroll through the world of better news, democracy, democratic institutions, defending democratic institutions in Brazil and South Korea, poverty alleviation, better social services. All this stuff is going on all the time. Easy to miss in a forest of bad news, but we're going to keep trying to highlight that because it's important to be aware of it. Things are not all dark, at least that's our argument, and we're sticking with it. So thank you for listening. Listen to our longer form What Could Go Right podcast. We'll be back with you next week. Please send us your ideas. We will highlight them. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.